Thank you. James Waterhouse reporting live from Odessa. Let's talk to Andrew Levi, a former senior British diplomat posted in Moscow until 2007. Thank you for talking to us. What do you think is happening here? What is President Putin trying to achieve?
Well, I think your correspondent summed it up very well. I think there's very little hope that this will be a real ceasefire. There's even less hope that it will be a lasting ceasefire. The way I see it is that it's a cynical propaganda move by President Putin. By announcing a ceasefire, he presents himself as a man of peace to his own people in Russia and to those who wish to believe him around the world. And then there will be Russian violations of the ceasefire, Ukraine will respond, and then President Putin will be able to say that the Ukrainians are violating the ceasefire and other problem. So that's the way I would frame it, I think.
And do you think that the timing of this has to do with what we heard from the Trump administration over the last couple of days, first from the Secretary of State, then from President Trump himself, saying that they wouldn't stay with this process much longer if there was no more progress?
I think it's something that President Putin might have done anyway, but the American comments over the last days have probably encouraged him. In your earlier report, you referred to him talking about Ukrainian aggression. And the real story of this war, and it's really fundamental, not just for the Ukraine war, but for the world, is that Russia has engaged in aggressive war. And back in the 1940s at the Nuremberg Tribunal after the Second World War, aggressive war was described as the supreme international crime, because everything flows from aggressive war. Self-defense is another matter. So what President Putin is trying to do is say, well, we're really fighting in self-defense. How he tries to justify that is another question. In fact, the aggression is coming from Russia, and he is trying to persuade people like President Trump and wider public opinion that, in fact, Russia is the peace party and the Ukrainians are the problem.
And you spent a lot of time in Russia yourself. How do you think this supposed temporary ceasefire is being perceived, particularly in the light of the absence of free media?
Yes, I started visiting Russia when President Yeltsin was in power, and I visited very frequently and then worked there after President Putin had come to power. And I think what's happening in Russia, there's been a huge change. Under President Yeltsin, there was a degree of freedom, although things were somewhat chaotic, as many will remember. Under President Putin, there's been an increasing clampdown on media, free media. So really what most Russians get is either propaganda or those who are struggling to get information from the outside world, gathering that together. They ignore the propaganda. They try to get what they can from sources like the BBC. I would say a large proportion of the Russian population just swallows the government propaganda, and others keep quiet while understanding that what their government is telling them isn't true.
Do you think the Trump administration may indeed take a pass on this and walk away from the situation in Ukraine?
One of the extraordinary things and disturbing things about the time we're in, the era we're now experiencing, is that we don't know the answer to that at all. Of course, the future is always unpredictable. You never know what's really going to happen. That's the nature of life. But with President Trump on so many fields, you don't need me to count them out, we just don't know. And it's unclear what President Trump's objectives are. Is it really peace? Is it some kind of carve-up of Europe with Russia and some way of pacifying things in such a way that the US can turn its attention to China? If so, I would say that's a huge error, strategic error for the US. So unfortunately, we don't know. And very briefly, if I may, President Vance recently talked about, Vice President Vance recently talked about the European countries, that they shouldn't be vassals of the United States. Well, that's all very well, but the United States has for decades been critical to European defense. NATO has been designed that way, and suddenly saying, we're not going to help Ukraine, we're not going to help the NATO countries who try to help Ukraine, if that's what the Americans are saying, creates a power vacuum, a destabilizing, very dangerous problem. And so I think we do need greater clarity, much greater clarity from the US administration.
Andrew Levy, thank you very much, former senior British diplomat posted in Moscow previously. Thank you.